Okay, hi everybody. Hello. Welcome to Los Luceros Historic Site, both in person and virtually. How many of you have been here before? That is awesome. Usually when I ask that question, it's like 2 people. So, well, welcome back. My name is Carly. I am the instructional coordinator, which is like the educator / current interim manager here at Los Luceros Historic Site. And we just wanted to welcome you to our first Mesa Talk of the season. And now we're losing our screen, of course. So just some Los Luceros announcements. We do have a new thing that every first Sunday of the month is free to New Mexico residents, and we are open from dawn till dusk. So it's perfect for birders, photographers, that kind of thing. And we're also starting our New Mexico Outdoor Pass program, which aims to get families outside to learn a new skill. So for instance, this upcoming first Sunday of the month, the theme is fish. And so we will be out there with Game and Fish teaching kids how to fish. So it's a great family event to come. It's free. There's a yoga class that morning. There's a ranger guided tour, all sorts of stuff. So if you want to find out anything else about Los Luceros things, follow the New Mexico Historic Sites Facebook page or our Los Luceros Facebook page. And Chester. Thank you.
I'm the man behind the camera. I'm mostly just going to be running the stream here, but we do have some announcements for Mesa Prieta. One, for anyone signed up for recorder training. I don't think anyone in this room is, but we will be starting that very soon. It's both an online and in-person course, so you complete the online portion, and then Candy and I train you in the field. So we're, well, optional. You're always welcome to join. Candy is our recording coordinator, and she does a lot of work behind the scenes, so I want to give you a shout out and make sure that you're recognized for all the work that you do. And yeah, Sandy, did you have any announcements before we get in?
No, I don't.
All right. So our guest speaker tonight is going to be Ron Barber, who will be giving his talk, Chasing the Feathered Serpents of the Southwest. And I don't have your abstract in front of me, so I'll let you introduce it.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, so we got all the tech problems solved. Let me see, can you guys hear me okay? And I assume your microphone's capturing me all right. Let me see, so I'll tell you a little bit about the Stone Calendar Project. That's really our main interest, and based on that we have all of these little side tracks. Yes. And And one of those is Chasing the Serpents. Another one is Ringing Rocks of the Southwest. I think I've given that talk here before. And I'll introduce you to some other side tracks. So this is one of many. So I'll start off with just a little bit of introduction on the Stone Calendar project. And so these are the types of light and shadow calendars that we're studying. And so what we're studying is how indigenous cultures use the sun's constantly changing position to develop their own indigenous calendars. And so we study these broadly all around the Southwest. This is where we're at right now, roughly here. And so we study them up and down the Rio Grande. In the ancestral Pueblo world, they occur up in the Fremont area, the Pattaya country, Hohokam, Mogollon. We've been down into Mexico, both in the Sierra Madres and down on the coast studying them, even out on the coast of California. And this particular one's all the way up on the Columbia River Gorge. And so this is really the main interest of the Stone Calendar project, is studying the ancient astronomical knowledge that's embedded in these panels here. And so this is an ancestral Hopi panel. And so our real interest is this light wedge that moves across this panel throughout the year. And it marks various glyphs at various times of the year. And so many of these are really complex panels. They're just loaded with imagery. The panels that are Pueblo 4 and after, so this is 1300 and on, we know a lot about it because of the continuity of the cultures. And so embedded on these are religion, mythology, clan symbols, shrine identification, there's historical events, and of course our main interest here is astronomical information. But of course there's a lot that we do not understand. So one of the things that we find on the panels are these plumed and horned serpents, and you can see the stylistic variation. There's a pictograph, a couple of rock art sites, contemporary images there and here. We see them in the ceramics, we see them ceramic effigies, we see them in Kiva murals. And so in studying these calendar panels all around the Southwest, we're seeing a variation of these serpents here. And so the interest is to understand the cultural connection to the calendars. The calendars are typically sun symbols or spirals, and we can't really tell culturally one spiral from the next. Thanks, let me turn my phone off. And so it also helps us to trace the migrants that are associated with these serpents and calendars. And so one of the things that we've been doing a little bit is probing the origin of the serpents. It's not really the objective of the study. You know, a lot of scholars have suggested that this was a northward diffusion of the Mesoamerican plumed serpent. And so there's a variety of plumed serpents in Mesoamerica. In the Valley of Mexico is the Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs. This is the from the Yucatan Maya, and so this is Kukulkan. And then down in the Quiche Maya, there's another serpent called the Kukulmats. And of course that one is written up in the Popol Vuh, so we know a little bit more about that. We know quite a bit about the Aztec Quetzalcoatl because of the codices. In fact, this is one of the Aztec codices. And in the Southwest, there are a variety of them, which I will discuss. And I might also talk about this one here, I'll just mention. This comes from the Cahokia culture, along the Mississippi. And so you can see these are serpents with wings, and so they might be a variation of what we're studying. Oops. There are cultural differences. This is a contemporary Avanu from up here in the Tewa country. Talked about the Aztec. This is from Pottery Mound. This is the Hopi Serpent. This is the Kolowisi Zuni Serpent. And so there are differences that identify these culturally from each other. And this is the serpent that started the study out at Hopi. I've been working out at Hopi for about 8 years with the tribe out there, identifying calendars and trying to reconstitute some of their oral traditions. And so this is the typical Hopi serpent. It has a blunt nose here. It has a single horn, and it's got some plumage. It's got some body markings here. And of course, this one here you can see is drastically different. And so this is a serpent that was actually brought in by migrants into the region. And so this is a population distribution of what the Southwest looked like in 1200 AD. This is what the distribution looked like when the Spanish came through. And so you can see there's a significant depletion of the population. I'm going to show you a video here, hopefully. Okay. And so this is going through every 50 years, and so this is the population distribution around 1300. This is about 1350, 1400, and by 1450, the entire southern region of the Southwest was depleted. And so I'll just kind of go back and manually do this again. So you can see what's interesting is around the 1200s, this was the most densely populated region in the Southwest. The Salt River had one of the largest populations, and you could actually walk from the Montezuma County region almost all the way to the Mexican border just by traveling from village to village. That's how many there were. And then in the late 1200s, we began to see the population depleting out of Four Corners. And, oops, here we go. And you'll see by this time we were seeing shifts. By 1300, the entire region is completely depopulated. And you'll see a general southward migration. And then in the 1400s, we saw some distribution. By 1450, as I said, the entire Southwest has been depopulated. And of course, these migrants are leaving their plumed serpents along the way. This is an artist rendition of Mesa Verde up in this region. This is an artist rendition of Casa Grande down here in the Phoenix area. Excuse me, in Hopi, we've been studying Antelope Mesa, and so there's a population explosion here in the 1300s. It's those migrants coming down, and that one serpent here is at a village called Kawaika. So the Hopi serpent has not really changed much over time. This is a contemporary painting. This is a turn-of-the-century drawing in one of the BAE publications. You can see a single horn in the plumes. You see it here also. You can see the body markings on it are rather unique. Here are some other turn-of-the-century, the same types of body markings, and so the Hopi would recognize these markings as identifying this serpent as the Pa'alulukong. And the Pa'alulukong is a single-horned serpent with plumes. There are certain ceremonies that occur, and these ceremonies at Hopi still occur today. These are images from the turn of the century, and so it's an ongoing and active religious practice. We see this serpent in the rock art. same style. But we also see different serpent, more like the Rio Grande serpent that has been brought into the region. There are some variations of the Hopi serpent. You can see this one here has a single horn, no plumes. This one looks like it's got a single horn also. And so we've been looking for the early serpent that sort of led to the contemporary Pa'alulukong at Hopi. And so I talked about this panel here. Down here there's a serpent that's about 9 feet long. It wraps all around the rock. And you can see it's got a crude head, perhaps some horns here. And so this might be an early variation. We also see these serpent-like images with a head like this and horns. It is kind of hard to tell really what that is. There's a place called Segue Canyon where the Kayenta culture thrived up until the mid-1200s when they abandoned that area. And so this serpent comes out of a Mallory 1880 publication. And so we've been searching for this, but nobody really knows where it's at. I'm beginning to doubt whether it really exists, but it's interesting because it looks much like the Hopi serpent. It looks like perhaps this is the single horn and this is plumes. And so this may be an early variation of the Hopi serpent. It hasn't changed much in contemporary art. It still retains the single horn, the plumes. At times you see it with this a cloud tail here associated with rain and lightning also. This is an interesting painting by a Navajo artist. I'll talk a little bit more about this one a little bit later on, but he's got slight different variations in his artwork. I'm going to move over to Zuni. Zuni has their own plumed and horned serpent. It has a single horn. You can see this a turquoise colored horn here. It's got plumes, but it also has a fur on it. You can see a slightly different style of the head, and it's got its own unique markings that distinguish it. There are versions of both the Hopi and the Zuni Koloisi of the serpent bringing a flood to destroy evil in a village. And in fact, this is actually a recurring theme throughout the Pueblo world. Whenever a village is destroyed, the oral tradition is it's usually destroyed because there was and this is sort of a small carving. You can see the horn here. Nearby there are these serpents in the rock art. This one might be horned. This one it's kind of hard to tell. And some of these, it's really hard to distinguish. You'll hear me use the term crested serpent. So crested serpent means it's got something on its head. A lot of times it's not clear whether it's horns or plumes or combinations of both. In Zuni, we see these in three-dimensional ceramics. We see them painted on the ceramics, as you see here, and then you actually see these in fetishes, carved three-dimensional fetishes also. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move around the map here. I talked about Hopi and Zuni. I'm going to jump up into the canyon lands of Utah and then sort of work southward on the chart here. These are images from Segue Canyon. And Segue Canyon and a lot of the canyon lands of Utah have a style that's known as the Barrier Canyon style pictographs. In many of these, it's not quite clear. This one here, it's very clear. You can see horns on the serpent here. This one here, people have studied it and suggested it's a horned serpent also. Some of these show serpents alone, such as this one's, and some of them they're being handled by humans. These are believed to be quite old, thousands of years BC. In fact, there's one report where the Great Gallery has been dated to 8,500 years old. And so these have been in the Southwest for quite a long time. This is I think this is Buckman Draw here. Again, we see a serpent image here. It's not quite sure, are these horns or are these ears? Some of these serpents here, it looks like it's got sort of a crest coming off of it. This one has sort of a snout, dog snout, but then it's got legs on it. I mean, it's a mythical beast anyway, and so we're not quite sure on a lot of these images. This one is a very interesting one. It looks like a serpent-like image. It's got wings on it as if it's flying. It does have perhaps maybe some small little horns there. And nearby, further south from there, is a place called the Chevelon Steps, and it's a well-known rock art area. They're a little bit difficult to see here, but these are sort of called bubble heads. You can see these antenna-looking features, and embedded in the neck right here and here are two serpents, and they both appear to be horned serpents. These are believed to be quite old. I don't know that there's any definitive dating on these, but there is a rock shelter nearby with some sandals that have been dated back to 8,000 years old. And so again, these are probably quite old, and we think this image has been in the Southwest for a while. Up in the Four Corners area, north of there in Utah, is the Fremont culture. The Fremont culture also seemed to have the horned serpent. This is a really long, about a 6-foot long serpent. You can see it's sort of been cross-hatched, like it's got scales on it. It's got some nice backward sweeping horns. This one might be a horned serpent also. This one is clearly a serpent body, some kind of crest on it. Not sure exactly what that is. There are some that are a little bit clearer. Most of these are in 9 Mile Canyon. A nice spiral here. You can see the backward sweeping horns. It's not too far from this one in Buckman Draw. They're probably about 50 miles apart, but probably separated by 6,000 years or more. But it's interesting that you can see the influence of this early style on the Fremont, which existed up until about the 1400s. We also see in Utah, this is at Sand Island. It's probably a Basketmaker, late Basketmaker, early Pueblo. You can see the serpent here. And again, very similar to the Fremont and some of the local Barrier Canyon style. This one, maybe it's a serpent, it's not quite clear. This one's not quite clear. This is a pictograph up at River House. It identifies it as a serpent with the eyes and some kind of a crest on it. And so these have also existed through Basketmaker and early Pueblo. What's interesting is this is a population, actually it's a site occupation distribution for Mesa Verde. This spot right here is the Canyon of the Ancients Museum. The road goes along here. This is the McElmo Creek. It's interesting that in all of these sites up here, and this represents 300 years of occupation in Mesa Verde. Talking to some of the archaeologists up there, in 40 years working up there, they've never seen a crested serpent in the rock art, never seen it in the murals, never seen it in the ceramics. And so it's interesting that you know, that serpent tradition didn't seem to come from the Mesa Verde area. You would think with all of the archaeological evidence that perhaps there's some up there. There are a few items, you know, these have been de-stretched to enhance the pictographs. This might be a horned serpent, it's kind of hard to tell. This looks like a serpent, this is painted plaster. It's got a little crest on it maybe. This is the Ismay panel. This is probably the clearest one that appears to have a little bit of a horn on it. But there's tons of rock art up in this area, but really a lack of these types of crested serpents in that area. If we drop down below Four Corners into the Chaco area, this is a ceramic effigy that I found on an old photograph, and I chased it down, and it's in the Hidden Center. And so it's a beautiful three-dimensional ceramic effigy, the top of a pot. It's been broken off here. This is another one from the Chupadero region. It's kind of hard to tell exactly, and I apologize for the lousy image here, exactly what kind of a creature this is, but you can see the horns on it. But you know, it certainly doesn't have the traditional snout that we'll see that exists up in this region here. But anyway, this image sort of dates this style or this belief in a horned serpent at Chaco at about 1000 AD. We've been looking across the Rio Grande from Hopi in Wupatki National Area. Let me switch to this one here. In Wupatki. Looking for plumed or horned serpents. There are these little serpent type images, but today we haven't located anything. There's a gob of rock art there. I've chased down a couple of rumors of serpents in the outback. There's still some more rumored to be there, and stay tuned. I was at Casa Malpais talking about archaeoastronomy, and serpents came up, and they said, "Hey, have you seen our serpent?" And so they took me in the back, and they had this thing kind of boxed up. And here's a picture of it. It's carved out of sandstone. This thing, when they had it on display, it stood about this high. This is the head that's carved. You can see the mouth, the eyes. You can see kind of a collar around the neck and a little, looks like a little indent in the top here. And that head is about this big around, and so it's very unique. Never seen anything like it. We don't really know what it looked like, but this is the painting that was close by, and I think, you know, it's probably inspired by this. You can see the little a crest here where there's maybe a little mohawk of feathers here, and a little collar that would go on here. And let me see from, and so that serpent is down in this region here. And so now we're going to drop down into the Rio Grande down below Albuquerque. And these are mural images from Pottery Mound. And so these, we see both the forward horn and a combination of plumes. We see this collared a mosaic here. Here we see a backward horn, set of plumes forward. And so in this region we see this combination of horns and plumes. These being just two-dimensional images. We don't really know if there would have been two horns or a single horn. A couple of other interesting things are the body adornments that we see on the serpent here. But we see a clear presence of both plumes and horns in this culture here. Across the river, over in the Ambo region, up in Tenabo Canyon, are these twin serpents here. A Again, we see some body adornment on these serpents. We see something on the neck of this one here. We see these little plumes or whatever they might be coming off of the bends of the serpents. It looks as though they have a single horn and perhaps two plumes. This one's kind of odd. I mean, it almost looks like it's a long snout, almost like a rhinoceros. Maybe these are plumes. It's kind of hard to tell. Right at the base of these are these two images. And so this is a warrior. You can see he's got a shield on, he's got a lance, he's actually confronting a serpent here. Again, you can see some of the body adornment and some of these little winglets or whatever they might be. And then a probable single horn and maybe plumes here. This one is a little more crudely chipped, but you can still see the same head style. You can see the horn bent over here, and it looks like a set of twin plumes there. And a couple of miles away is this pictograph here, and same sort of a head style, short little snout, something coming out of the mouth, but you see a single horn here and then some multicolored plumes. And so all of these within this region appear to have, one horn and maybe one or two plumes in the Tanabo area. And so this is, again, the pottery mound. We see similarities between these two, sort of a red, round head, short little snout. Some of them with emanations coming from the mouth. And on this one here, I sort of painted in, I think, what the horn might have looked like. There's an overhang right near Alboa that's got all kinds of gorgeous masks and paintings on it. If you ever get a chance, ask about it, see if you can go see it. This is a photograph of this image here. So I've gone through and tried to reconstruct the image. But the image is clearly of a serpent. It's got similar body marks. It's got these little red like plumages coming off. And I worked as hard as I could, but I just could not find the image of the head of the serpent. But again, this looks as though it's a human handling a serpent that we've seen in other areas of the Southwest. Cerro Las Lunas has a similar image of a shielded warrior with a lance confronting a serpent here. And at Isleta, there is a legend, and this is only maybe 20 miles from Isleta. There is the legend of the twins fighting the serpent, and so they're both fighting the serpent to regain their animals and their father's heart, who is the son. And they're helped by a bear, lion, and eagle, and it's interesting because it looks as though there is a lion paw in this image here. And so perhaps this is an image sort of commemorating that legend. We're going to jump north up into Tewa land. Most of us recognize this as the Vanyu. We see it in a lot of Maria Martinez's ceramics and others. This is a Curies. The Curies have a different serpent and a different name and probably a different set of beliefs associated with that. We see this up on the Pajarito Plateau. It has a back-swept horn. It's got the cloud terrace tail. This is the large image up at the Puye Cliffs, not far from here. A nice backward sweeping horn, arrow emanating from the mouth. And most of these up in this region have kind of a dog-like snout. And we see two-headed serpents up in the Jemez, in the Cavates. Up on the Pajarito, we see a single horn. We see the double-horned serpent. We find it in the rock art. And then, of course, all over Mesa Prieta. Now, Chester, you we sort of figured out that your estimate was there was about 700 and some serpents based on the percentage of serpents and to be recorded. I think it was like 780. Now, does that include Mesa Prieta and the broader area that you guys are recording, or just Mesa Prieta itself?
That's just Mesa Prieta itself.
Yeah. Okay. So, so up here, there are serpents everywhere. And of course, if you've gone out and looked at rock art, you know, you've probably noticed them all over the place. Let me see. Let me go ahead. And so, you know, in the general Mesa Prieta area, again, you see single and double horned variations. Down in White Rock Canyon, you see the single horn, you see the double horn, and there's serpents all over White Rock Canyon and the Pajarito Plateau. Galisteo, there are all kinds of serpents there. Again, single and double horn. Some of the large serpents, this is at, I think it's Pueblo Blanco. I think this is about a 15-foot long serpent. You can see a very large terraced tail with it, and that's associated with the water and the bringing of rain. Here's a single horn. Notice the snout. We see in the Tewa region both the horn swept forward and the horn swept backwards, and then these double horned ones here. La Bajada area and La Cieneguilla, again, just full of serpents of various kinds. This is sort of the heartland of Tewa. I would say Mesa Prieta is probably about the size of that little black dot that you see right there, and there's 700 and some on. And if you take into account the Galisteo Basin, La Cieneguilla, White Rock, in this area, there's probably thousands of these serpents in this area, and so the serpent tradition is very, very strong in this region. And I think all the ones that I've seen, I would judge are horned only. I don't think I've seen anything. Has anybody seen anything that looks like plumes? I think everything we see up in this region is horned only. Let me see. From here, I'm going to start jumping south into the Jornada region. So if we go down to Roswell, this is a pit house. And this is the plastered wall. You can see the outline here of this serpent. Much different crest on this serpent. And if you take a look at the color, this is probably the colors that it looked like. It looked like it was green and black and white on an adobe background. There's actually a similar serpent on another wall, and so there are two walls facing each other, and it appeared as though there were two serpents facing each other. And these are fairly large, about 10 feet long. This is a pictograph north of there, but it seems to have a similar sort of a blunt appendage on its head. This is a wooden piece that is found not too far from Fox Place, but again, it seems to have a single horn, and perhaps these are plumes. It's really hard to tell. So there's an interesting horned serpent, and this is recorded in Kirtland's rock art of the Texas Indians, and it occurs way out in the Panhandle, not too far from Amarillo. And it's interesting that in 1853, Whipple's party was coming through doing some surveys, and they met up with some Pueblo Indians that were hunting buffalo out there. And they told him that this is our serpent, this is the serpent, this is the guardian of the water, and it was there to give rain and preserve the lives of those that pray for him. This is about 13 foot long, and it's interesting because if we had not had this connection back to the Pueblo Indians, we might erroneously conclude that, hey, these Plains Indians also had their own horned serpent. But this is a case of this belief of theirs carried a long ways. In fact, the nearest pueblo at this time was Pecos, and so that's 180 miles out onto the plains there. And so these, in this case, they're not really migrants, they're hunters, but the migrants also carried this belief with them as they moved around the Southwest. Mimbres has a very strong ceramic tradition. Very nice. I think in the Mimbres they're all forward sweeping horns. This is a rock art image in the Mimbres area. It's kind of hard to tell whether this is a forked tongue or horns on it, but these are very clear in these ceramic images and in many of the other ceramic images that you see. Might also mention that we do see similar masks that have a backward sweeping horn, but it's really hard to tell whether that's meant to be a bighorn sheep or whether it's associated with a backward sweeping horn, but these are quite clear. You know, the bighorns do not curl forward. Not too far from there is this Rio Grande serpent. This is the de-stretched image of the horned serpent. It's emerging from a crack, and right at the base of this crack is the spring. And it's interesting, these little images that are cascading down are very reminiscent of these little images that we see up in the Tewa region. And in the Tewa region, they'll tell you that this is representative of moisture or rain. And so that might be a reasonable interpretation of this image also. And there's additional rock art down in the Jornada region. I won't go into all of those. Three Rivers, it's interesting that there is nothing really definitive at Three Rivers. How many of you have been to Three Rivers before? Yeah, Three Rivers, I mean, the rock art there is just phenomenal. And you would think if there was horned serpents there, you would see these very clear horned serpents. I mean, the horned serpents, they exist north, south, east, and west of Three Rivers, but not at Three Rivers. And so this is probably the closest thing to one, but you know, it's not a very detailed one, but it's got a little bit of a swept horn. Again, a horn that sweeps backwards. Maybe it's a horned serpent. Maybe it's something to do with bighorn sheep. It's really hard to tell. There are some serpents there that are very nicely done, but it's interesting that there aren't really very clear horned or a combination of horned and plumed serpents there. Alamo Mountain is further south, down along the Texas border there. There's a number of different styles with a single horn, and this one here, and in that same region there are all kinds of other serpents, but not too many horned serpents. There are a few at Alamo Mountain, and Alamo Mountain, there's a spring there, and Alamo Mountain may very well have been a waypoint for migrants that were coming through. The rock art at Alamo Mountain is, it ranges from archaic through early Jornada, late Jornada. I think there's even puebloan rock art there, and there's Apache rock art there. And so the springs have been visited there for thousands of years. Further south from there, just into Texas, this is at Waco Tanks, and here you can see the snout. You can see a very large, thick horn, and these plume-like features coming over. Not too far from there is Alamo Mountain. Again, it has this huge horn kind of a square snout and these plume-like features. These are not too far from each other. They clearly seem to be in the same kind of a style. Jumping from Texas all the way over to the New Mexico, Arizona border. This comes from Patricia Crown's book on Salado ceramics. And a lot of people have postulated that this image here has to do with the Horned Serpent. Certainly has this similar crest that's got an eye, and some of these certainly look like the serpents up here. And here you can see them on a different ceramic. And so I haven't studied the rock art in this region, but the Salado phase was a late phase in about 1350, 1400s, and it was clearly brought by migrants that came into that region and probably brought their own serpent belief with them. This is in northern Arizona, not too far from Sedona. There's a small little area, and I would say it's maybe 3 or 4 miles long, where you see these types of serpents here. They seem to have a kind of a round head, serpentine body, and sort of a fan tail. I wasn't quite sure if these were serpents until I ran across this one here. This one clearly has a set of eyes, the same body, and a fan tail. They're certainly not crested serpents the way we're used to thinking of them, but perhaps these had a different type of plumage, maybe tail plumage, and it's really not unprecedented, because we see some of these in the Aztec and Mixtec codices. And so here's a plumed serpent. You can see the plumage is really enhanced in the tails here. And this is at Xochicalco. You can see the enhanced plumage in the tails. And so perhaps this is a local variation. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the Southwest. It's just in a very local, confined region. I don't think we'll ever know, because I don't think we really know any ethnographic association with that, or any of the direct descendants in the area. Jumping further south into Casas Grandes, Mexico, in the rock art, we've studied a number of areas down there. This looks more like a bird. The same with this one here. This one here could very well be a serpent. We see the kind of the blunt snout. We see a serpentine body and a horn on that. But in the Casas Grandes area, it's very evident in the ceramics. You can see the two horns here on kind of a square-headed serpent, and we see these all over the ceramics. Most of these appear to have symmetric horns. This one here I find to be one of the most interesting ones, because it looks as though it has a single horn here and then plumes coming off the back. And so we see that further north in some of the regions in the Jornada, as well as the murals at Pottery Mound. And also called to your attention the mosaic collar here that we also saw at Pottery Mound. So that could have been also from migrants that are headed further south during this period. It's interesting, the absence of these plumed or combined plumed and horned serpents in some regions. And this is basically through central Arizona. And so plotted on here, these little blue marks are the regions where we find the ball courts. And the ball courts really occur in the Hohokam heartland. We find them up in the Verde region. We find them up here at Wupaki. This is an artist's rendition of the probably one of the largest ball courts here at Snaketown. This, of course, is a photograph of probably the northernmost, which is up here at Wupatki. And as I said, it's interesting, the plumed and horned serpents of Hopi are right here. This is only about 50, 60 miles as the crow flies. And so this is the Little Colorado. And south of the Little Colorado, they just don't seem to exist. And so it seems to be a totally different cultural tradition. And so this northern region is the Sanawa region, so Wupatki, Winona, Chavez Pass. This is Flagstaff. I grew up. This is my old stomping grounds, and then further south is Perry Mesa, the Sun Valley. Might say we've looked out here on the Gila Bend is right here. The lower Gila. This is getting into the Pattaya country. We don't find it there. There are a few that are rumored to exist, and in fact, Aaron Wright at Archaeology Southwest has been studying the Horned Serpent tradition in Hohokam, and his conclusion is the same as mine, and that is that it just does not seem to exist down here. And so there might be one or two, but compared to the tradition up north where there are literally thousands of them, it doesn't seem to exist in that area. There's a distinct region where we find this combination of plumes and horns sort of in this region here. We find it at Hopi, we find it at Zuni. I talked about the murals there. This might be a combination of that. We see a couple down here. And then, of course, we see it down at Paquime, Casas Grandes. North of this region is where we find the horned-only serpents. I'm going to talk a little bit about some commonalities with some of the Mesoamerican serpents. This is from one of the Maya codices. You can see the body accents slightly different than these here. We see this sort of a collared mosaic in a number of regions in the Southwest. This seems to have a collar, but of a different type of a design. We see humans handling serpents. This is Barrier Canyon style. This is probably thousands of years BC. We see it in the turn of the century. This is probably mid-1400s, a pictograph. And of course, this is still practiced at Hopi today with the snake dances that occur every other year. We see this merging of humans and spirits. We see it in the murals. Clearly in the Mimbres ceramics. Both of these images come from Maya. Not exactly sure what that represents, but perhaps there is some similar religious belief. We see two horned serpents. And this is probably the most interesting one. There are several Maya codices that shows serpents consuming, a human from the head, and then we also see this at Pottery Mound. And so just the fact that there are plumed serpent similarities, and now we see them actually, taking some similar action is really interesting. And so perhaps there is a ritual connection between whatever is going on here. So this means another sidetrack is to study the Mesoamerican codices a little bit more to really understand what is this all about. In this plot here, the yellow represents the regional and temporal distribution of the horned serpents. Blue is a combination of plumed and horned. I might say I don't think I have seen anything in the Southwest that suggests there are plumed serpents only, like we see in Mesoamerica. And And so up in this region, again, the barrier canyon style, you know, if it goes back to 3000 or 6000 BC, we would extend that timeline to maybe right about there. And we see these in Basketmaker, we see these in Fremont, all up in this region here. You saw the Chaco ceramic effigy, which sort of came from that region there. And up in the northern region of the Pueblo world is where we find horned only. It's in this band here and some down here that we find a combination of plumed and horned. And as I said, it's interesting that we just don't find any over here in the what I call the ball court cultures. And so I'm of a different belief than I think a lot of them. When I see these serpents, I don't tie them necessarily to Mesoamerica, because I think, you know, particularly the continuity of Barrier Canyon, Basketmaker, and Fremont, and up in this region, I think they have existed well before, you know, the earliest Olmec and Zapotec serpents, clearly way before the classic Mesoamerican, and way before the post-classic and the height of the Aztec Empire. And so I think the horned serpents clearly were indigenous to the Southwest, and perhaps there is some diffusion of ideas coming up, perhaps the Plumed Serpent, and maybe in this region here we see the combination of these plumed and horned in this region sort of colliding with you know, the diffusion of the horned serpent into this region here. I also find it interesting, I didn't realize until I put this plot together, that the lack of crested serpents in this region here. And so clearly there is a tradition of, you know, ball court tradition that probably came up the coast. And it's interesting, we always associate ball courts and plumed serpents with Mesoamerica, but why they forgot their plumed serpent, you know, that's another sidetrack. And so at this point, I'll go ahead, and I think that's my last slide, yeah. And so I'll take questions, comments, suggestions, ideas. So, did you capture all that okay, Chester?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
When would be the next snake dance by the Hopis?
The Hopi snake dance is closed to outsiders, okay, and it occurs every other year in the fall. Yeah. So. Yes?
I just want to say that I find it interesting that even among Uto-Aztecan speakers, we seem to have this split between plumed serpents and not. You know, looking at that ball court line without them, that's also largely Uto-Aztecan speakers, except for the human speakers like you were talking about with the Patayan. So, and in my experience in the Great Basin, particularly in the Mojave Desert, I can't think of any in the Mojave unless you're aware of any.
No, I think the I'll call them the crested serpents are probably just in this region here and up into Canyonlands, you know, and then down in this region here. I think it's I'm not aware of any. Like I said, we've studied rock art out in the Pattaya region, you know, up around Las Vegas, out into California. I'm just not aware. And we've studied rock art down in Trincheras region and the Rio Maya region, and not seen any on this side of the Sierra Madres. You know, we've seen them down to here. So, you know, maybe with another field trip, we'll go a little bit further south and see what else we find there. But yeah, somebody else pointed out, Chester, that the same with great houses. Great houses seem to have a distribution that does not, go over into this region here. So it'd be interesting to plot the location of great houses, because that seems to be, again, a different tradition, right? And so try to touch this every now and then to keep it going. Yes?
Well, in our area of northern New Mexico, we see plenty of the serpents,
Mm-hmm.
but they're in our pueblo timeline,
Mm-hmm.
and our archaic are so abstract
Mm-hmm.
until they get up to the later archaic, when we see the footprints and handprints and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And yet some of those things that you were showing us, especially in Utah, they were archaic and they were so complex.
Yeah. If you've ever studied the Barrier Canyon, it is just amazing, the detail in them, and inside the bodies, the little it's just phenomenal. The care and the detail that was taken in those.
So does that imply that in our area, the culture evolved much slower or later?
Sounds like a question for Chester.
There's a joke among some of the archaeologists, particularly in the northern Rio Grande, that the early Pueblo periods can also be called the latest archaic. So we see this persistence of hunter-gatherers and this persistence of these older images, while other parts of the Southwest and the Great Basin are really starting to regionalize, like the emergence of the Barrier Canyon style. And I would argue, but not everyone agrees with me, that we also see regionalization happening in the Mojave around that time.
Yeah, you had a question back there?
Is there any suggestion in your conversations with Native Americans or in your own mind as to what the symbolic meaning of the serpent is?
Yes. There's plenty of ethnographic information written on it. I'll just tell you it in general. Well, I think the recording of the Rocky Del serpent out in the panhandle of Texas, the lieutenant was told the serpent is here as the guardian of the water source. And so they're associated with water. They're associated with rain. I think they're associated, since the water sources are connected to the underworld, they're connected with the underworld. In some of the Pueblo mythology, they are the source of knowledge. They're the source of maize that was given to the Pueblo people. In both Zuni and Hopi, they're both associated with the destruction of evil villages. And so I've probably told you more than I know, and there's much more out there. But it is an active, it's not an archaic religion. I mean, it is still an active, ongoing, practiced religion up and down the Rio Grande, at Zuni, and at Hopi also.
Is there any suggestion of the inference between a vertical and a horizontal serpent?
Not that I know of. So somebody else might know. So let me see, you had a question back there, did you? No. Yes.
Well, given the numbers you've found, 700 here all the time. So I assume that these were done not by a class of residents that were different than the normal person. In other words, everybody was doing this in rock art. Is that right? All the members of the public would be doing it.
Oh, I don't think so. The reason I say that is you go to some rock art sites, and the occupation nearby, maybe it's dated for 200 years, and you find very little rock art there. And so you think, if people were here for 200 years, and if everybody was putting their mark on the rock, there would be lots of rock art, okay? But There just isn't. And as I mentioned in one of the early slides, is we know that an important component of the rock art that's put up is religious oriented. And so it's probably not everybody that went up and did that. I don't know if we have any. Oh, let me tell you a story. We were out at Hopi, and there is this panel with all of these handprints, and we're trying to figure out, gosh, what kind of ritual was going on here and so on. And so years later, I ran across a photograph that was taken around the turn of the century, and here's about 5 or 6 Pueblo boys all, having their hand up, blowing, paint on it. And so it's a bunch of Pueblo kids, And so I don't think we really know, going back, what was the protocol, right? I don't think we really know that. And so, yes?
If I understood you correctly, you said maybe in your opinion that you don't believe maybe totally that the serpent imagery came from the Mesoamerica area, and that there was maybe a simultaneous or independent emergence of the similar imagery coming from more north. Can you speak more about that, that phenomenon of similar imagery emerging independently?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the Barrier Canyon style timeline, as I said, if I extended it to 6,000 BC, that timeline would go probably about here. And so that tradition of horned serpents, handling serpents and so on, it was alive in the Southwest for a long period of time. I think the Zapotec, I think the earliest formation of the Olmec was about 1500 BC. Help me out if anybody else knows the dates better than I do. And so there's a classic carved serpent that comes from La Venta that dates to this period. And of course, I think we can sort of trace that, into Mesoamerica. And so I think the horned serpent, has been around, up in this region for a long period of time. And I think we sort of see a continuity in cultures and time and in the regional distribution to suggest that perhaps the Tewa heartland where we see it today probably was influenced by these earlier cultures. But perhaps the plumed serpent may have come up because we do see it in the Sierra Madres, we do see it in the Rio Grande, and so perhaps the plumed serpent ideology came up, and maybe they merged together because in this region here we find these combined horned and plumed. And as I said, I don't think I've seen anything that would suggest there is a plumed-only serpent. If we found a plumed-only serpent, except for those ones at Secret Mountain, which are, right in this region. Yeah, the ones in Secret Mountain are right here, and those are the ones that have kind of a fantail. Maybe those are plumes. We don't really know. I don't think we know the descendants of that culture. So.
Something that just kind of strikes me about, you were pointing out the Rio Grande, and I was thinking about some of the examples you showed, particularly pottery showed macaws on the same piece as the plumed serpent. I was thinking about the movement of macaws into the Southwest, which we know they came up to here, and wondering if you think there might be a connection with the movement of the plumed serpent imagery along with the trade of macaws.
Interesting, because the largest number of macaws in the Southwest, I think outside of Paquimé, come from Wupatki, which is right in this region here. And so Wupatki, I think there were remains of 14 macaws, but we don't find the Crested Serpent culture in that region. And so it's almost as if, they sort of came up independently, right? And so, yeah.
Complicated.
Interesting questions to dig into further. Yeah.
Also, I'm going to have to say goodbye to the live streams. So we're running out of battery here.
Oh.
Okay. That doesn't mean that that's going to be the end of the question and answer
Yeah.
period.
Okay.
For those of you tuning in online, if you want to ask questions of future speakers, come in person. And thank you all for joining us.